In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, January 20th. President Yoon underscores the importance of solidarity for tangible action against some of the world's more urgent challenges, including climate change and the digital divide. And here in Korea, indoor mask requirements will be lifted in most venues starting January 30th, with the exception of medical centers, nursing homes and public transportation. Meanwhile, over 26 million people are expected to head to their hometowns this Lunar New Year holiday, with some 5 million each day during the 4-day holiday, which starts on Saturday. Come January 30th, indoor mask requirements here in Korea will only be mandated at certain places and lifted in most other venues, including schools, places of work, as well as leisure. Arirang starts us off.
South Korea's indoor mask mandate will be lifted from January 30th. The decision was made during a Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters meeting on Friday. And from that day, mask wearing inside will be recommended rather than a requirement. It will take effect following this weekend's Lunar New Year holiday, with travel and family gatherings increasing during that period. And while mask wearing will no longer be mandated at most places, including schools, movie theaters, and restaurants, they will still need to be worn at facilities like hospitals, care homes, and on public transportation. During the meeting, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said the decision came after a number of COVID-19 requirements, including a downward trend in figures for the deaths and the critically ill, were met. He added that there's a high possibility of a temporary increase in newly confirmed cases after the holiday, as cases rose at the same point last year. The Prime Minister said vaccination is vital to protect against any such increase.
With the lifting of the indoor mask mandate, vaccination has become more important. We advise unvaccinated people above 60 and elderly people living in vulnerable areas to get inoculated as soon as possible.
The decision means South Korea will no longer be the only country out of 38 OECD nations to fully require mask wearing indoors. 16 countries, including the US, Japan, and Canada, are free from wearing masks indoors. While in other countries, mask mandates are still in place at some facilities like medical centers and on public transportation. With the introduction of the new rules, South Korea will be left with just 2 COVID-19 restrictions still being enforced: 7 days isolation for confirmed cases, as well masking up while at certain public facilities. Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says they are set to discuss reducing the number of days in isolation for those who test positive.
There have been related discussions here, and countries like Hong Kong and Japan are already having talks. Officials feel it's now time to start discussing shortening the isolation period as indoor mask mandates are lifted.
The official added they would gradually consider lifting isolation measures altogether, depending on whether the WHO decides to downgrade COVID-19 as a public health emergency of international concern, as well as changes to South Korea's own COVID alert level. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Now, precisely 3 years ago on this day, Korea confirmed its first case of COVID-19. Since then, health officials and medical workers have dedicated themselves to containing the pandemic and to ensuring public health. Now, that being said, our Shin Se-byuk looks back at their efforts thus far.
January 20th, 2020. Exactly 3 years ago today, the very first COVID-19 case was confirmed in South Korea. Since then, the virus has infected nearly 30 million people, killing 33,000. During that time, South Korea faced a series of infection waves and changes in policies. The year 2020 was when the so-called new normal began, with a series of social distancing measures announced in April. Schools closed, businesses were forced to shut down, and large group gatherings were prohibited. And in October, it became mandatory to wear a mask. In 2021, with the hope of getting back to normal, the first vaccine inoculations began in February. But the Delta variant emerged in the summer, causing infections to spike and hospitals to suffer bed shortages. In November, with high vaccination rates, the country took its first steps towards a gradual return to normal life. But it abruptly came to a halt the following month due to the Omicron variant. Game-changing oral treatments, namely Pfizer's Paxlovid pill, were rolled out at the start of 2022, but Omicron infections kept rising. Record after record, 6-digit cases every day. And in mid-March, it peaked with over 600,000 infections reported in a single day. After the peak in March, health authorities announced the lifting of social distancing measures, ending the cap on social gatherings and limits to business hours. In May, people were no longer required to wear masks outdoors unless they were in large gatherings. 4 months later, the government decided to completely lift the outdoor mask mandate. And starting in October, those entering the country from overseas were no longer required to submit negative COVID results. And now, in 2023, the country is looking to scrap its very last antivirus measure, the indoor mask mandate. While there's no doubt that the country is on track to back to pre-pandemic life, an infectious diseases expert warns that people should stay vigilant.
There are other kinds of coronaviruses that cause light cold symptoms, but some kinds cause severe pneumonia, as we've seen in the past, like MERS, SARS, and of course COVID-19. The virus is likely to continue taking a death toll of around 10,000 every year.
As for the possibility of a new variant emerging, the expert says,
we should remember that new variants can always emerge and cause a dramatic spike in cases globally. Keeping that in mind, what matters now is that we come up with a systematic and better response system for future health crises.
3 years of COVID-19, we are only inches away from finally returning to pre-pandemic normalcy. But what has changed now and then is the need for people's continuous vigilance against the virus and a proper medical response system for future pandemics. 신새벽, Arirang News.
In other news, nearly half of Korea's population will be on the move this Seollal holiday. According to the Korea Transport Institute, over 26 million people are expected to head to their hometowns, with some 5 million on a daily basis during the 4-day holiday that begins tomorrow, which is Saturday. Now, this is up 20% compared to last year. Also, over 90% of those traveling will be taking their own vehicles. Roads will be most congested on Saturday morning for those heading out of the capital region and on Monday afternoon for those returning. Heavy traffic is also forecast for Sunday, which is the actual Seollal day. Also, in related news, inflation here is affecting the layout of charity tables for Seollal celebration. And for some perspective, our Shin Ha-young compares this year's grocery bills to those of last year.
Every Lunar New Year, Koreans prepare food on a charity table to honor their ancestors. But there could be more fruits and nuts and less meat on many charity tables this year. Compared to last year, fruits and nuts are around 10% cheaper, while livestock prices are up almost 6%. Recent data by Korea Price Information shows groceries for a charity table for a family of 4 are expected to cost 254,500 Korean won at traditional markets. That's roughly $205. The price has gone up by 4.1% from last year. At large supermarkets, prices has risen to 359,741 or about $290. The current economic conditions have led to some items increasing in price while others have got cheaper.
Prices of agricultural products like fruits, nuts, and vegetables, which have seen an increase in production, have fallen compared to last year. On the other hand, prices of livestock products and processed foodstuffs have risen. This is mainly because of a rise in prices of raw materials like global grain and oil prices, which have been affected by the war in Ukraine.
With inflation adding to people's burden this Seollal, many shoppers are trying to keep their charity tables simple with cheaper and more convenient ready-made products like this japchae and 빈대떡.
With the same amount of money, I was able to purchase enough groceries last year, but not this year. For the charity table, I think people prefer buying ready-made products instead, as that is more convenient, and for me, they even taste better. This change was also reflected in the data. In a recent survey conducted by Incrude, a local online job placement portal, 2/3 of the respondents said they will simplify their charity tables by reducing the types of food or using ready-made items.
Many have skipped setting the 차례 table for the last 2 years after the COVID-19 outbreak. The 성균관 Confucian Association announced details of a simplified 설날 table setting last Monday, aiming to maintain desirable spirits by suggesting a less complicated way.
The government has also unveiled extra measures to tame prices.
We will try to lower the prices of 16 commodities that are in high demand, including apples, pears and pork, by supplying 208,000 tonnes of goods, which is the most ever, and providing 30 billion Korean won for discounts.
As a result, prices of certain groceries like chicken have already stabilized ahead of Seollal. 신하영, Arirang News.
In Switzerland, President Yoon Seollal addressed participants at this year's Davos Forum on Thursday, placing emphasis on solidarity to tackling some of the world's pending matters, including climate change, digital divide and geopolitical tensions. Our senior top office correspondent Moon Gon-young recaps his remarks.
President Yoon Seollal on Thursday at this year's World Economic Forum, taking place under the theme Cooperation in a Fragmented World. He identified economic uncertainty, geopolitical risks, social fragmentation, and the weakening of the multilateral trade system as some of the multiple crises facing the world today.
기후변화의 위기, 보건과 디지털 격차는 세계 시민의 자유, 국제사회의 평화와 번영을 위협하고 있습니다.
For that, the South Korean leader appealed to his fellow world leaders to work together for greater reciprocal solidarity and avoid a global fragmentation into rival blocs that could play havoc with supply chains.
장벽을 쌓고 보호주의를 강화하는 것은 결코 올바른 해답이 될 수 없습니다.
Pinpointing nuclear power generation and clean hydrogen as key means to tackle climate change and bolster energy security, Mr. Yoon stressed the importance of cooperation between those with great potential for green hydrogen production, such as the Middle East and Europe, and countries with advanced technologies in utilizing hydrogen, such as Korea and Japan. Addressing the digital divide also topped his agenda.
대한민국은 디지털 권리 장전을 마련하여 글로벌 디지털 질서의 정립에 기여할 것입니다. 새로운 이슈를 해결하기 위한 원칙을 제시할 것입니다.
President Yoon used his Davos debut to reaffirm his administration commitment to expanding nuclear power generation, reversing a previous phase-down policy as South Korea scrambles for ways to reach its net zero target.
원자력을 감축하려는 시도가 몇 년간 지속되어 온 탓에 원전의 이런 생태계들도 많이 힘들어졌습니다. 신재생 에너지에 대한 기술력을 강화하고 또 원자력 발전을 좀 더 확대해 나갈 생각을 가지고 있습니다.
He also said it was easiest to build ties with countries that share the same universal values and that unwavering commitment to freedom is the most powerful response to crisis. However, on China,
체제가 다르거나 보편적 가치에 있어서의 많은 차이가 있는 국가들과의 관계를 배제하고 차단하는 그런 방식으로 운영될 것이 아니라 더 포용적이고 더 융합적인 그런 방식으로 운영돼야 된다고 생각합니다.
The annual meeting of the World Economic Forum 2023 brought together leaders from government, businesses, and civil society for its first full-blown in-person gathering in 3 years due to the global pandemic. Mr. Yoon became the first South Korean president to address the Davos crowd since President Park Geun-hye delivered her special address back in 2014. Moon Gon-young, Arirang News.
And after his address at the World Economic Forum, President Yoon Seollal made his way to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, where Albert Einstein is said to have studied and taught. There, President Yoon shared Korea's plans to promote quantum technology and invited scholars at the institute for their insights. To take a listen.
퀀텀 사이언스가 대단히 어렵고 또 장기간의 연구와 투자가 필요한 분야이지만 우리 대한민국 정부는 미래 국가 전략 기술의 하나로 이 퀀텀 사이언스를 선정해서 국가 차원에서 역량을 결집하고 있습니다. 여러분께서 주신 이 고견이 향후 우리 양자 기술 정책에 중요하게 활용될 것이라고 생각합니다.
Among the renowned scholars present was German scientist Andreas Wallraff, one of the world's leading experts in superconductor quantum computing. President Yoon also took the occasion to highlight quantum technology's broader benefits for humanity, while sharing plans to foster it as one of Korea's national strategic technologies. Korea hopes to develop a quantum computer by the year 2026. Meanwhile, back at the Davos Forum, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed calls for more weapon support from his counterparts in the West, and a number of European countries were quick to respond. Our Isingjae has details.
Speaking to world leaders at the Davos Forum on Thursday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called for more speed in terms of decisions on arms deliveries to his country amid the Russian invasion. He also called on the international community for further support and backing for the war effort. Specifically, the Ukrainian leader called for air defense missiles and tanks. In response, the head of the NATO Military Committee, Admiral Rob Barr, told reporters that tanks were important for Ukraine to be a match for Russia.
Well, the tank question is, in a war like it is being fought, every type of equipment is necessary. And the Russians are fighting with tanks, so the Ukrainians need tanks as well.
However, Europe's Supreme Allied Commander, General Christopher Cavoli, said that Western technology was outperforming Russian technology in the war, but cautioned that tanks alone were not the solution. Meanwhile, Sweden on Thursday pledged to send its Archer artillery system, a modern mobile howitzer, which Ukraine has been requesting for months. Speaking at a press conference, Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said his government had agreed on a three-part military support package for Ukraine, which also includes sending armored vehicles and anti-tank missiles. Their announcement was followed by the UK promising to send 600 Brimstone missiles, while Denmark said it would donate 19 French-made Caesar howitzers to Ukraine. However, with Western allies pledging billions of dollars in weapons for Ukraine on Thursday, Germany gave no sign of lifting a veto on deliveries it fears would provoke Moscow. With concerns that winter will give Russian forces time to regroup and unleash a major attack, Ukraine has been pushing for German-made Leopard battle tanks, which are held by an array of NATO nations, but a transfer to Ukraine would require Germany's approval. The issue looks set to dominate talks on Friday in Germany between Western allies at Ramstein Air Base. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
On the cultural frontier, a beautiful musical sharing the life of Beethoven is gracing the local stage, and our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin joined the audience to take a look.
Beethoven comes back to life on stage. The musical Beethoven had its world premiere in Seoul, South Korea last week. It's an original piece created by Grammy-winning musical lyricist Mihail Kunse and composer Sylvester Levay. The pair joined forces with South Korea's very own EMK musical company, and after more than 7 years of joint effort, the long-anticipated piece has been welcoming audiences at the Seoul Arts Center. The show is set in Vienna, Austria during the early 19th century. Ludwig van Beethoven, in his 40s, is living alone, distrusting love and people. Though hailed as the best pianist and composer of that time, he's living in the shadow of his painful past, growing up under a violent and abusive father. Then he meets a woman named Anthony Brentano, and the two fall in love. But their relationship faces a rocky road as Anthony is already married and Beethoven starts losing his hearing. Throughout the 165-minute runtime, the show walks the audience through the legendary composer's life, all the ups and downs. What's worth noting is that all the musical numbers are based on Beethoven's works, from Moonlight Sonata, Pathétique, Für Elise to Symphony No. 5.
There's a scene where Beethoven steps down into the orchestra pit and actually starts conducting. We wanted to make the audience feel closer to his music and also emphasize his career as a musician.
And the production not only offers great music, It's packed with a stellar lineup of actors. Singer and actor Park Hyo-shin, actors Park Eun-tae and Kai, all big names in the industry, star as Beethoven. Cho Jung-un, Ok Ju-yeon, and Yoon Gong-ju play his secret lover, Anthony Brentano.
This is the very first edition of Beethoven. None of us were familiar with the script or the song, so we weren't really sure how it would all turn out. But now I'm sure Beethoven will be smiling down on us and rooting for our show.
It's challenging but fun. We're constantly revising the production based on audience feedback, so we're excited about how it'll improve between now and closing night.
Those who wish to explore Beethoven's life and music can do so until March 26th. 송유진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In France, at least 1 million people took part in a nationwide protest over pension reform plans. Taking place on Thursday local time, trains, flights, schools and businesses faced major disruptions as protesters across the country took to the streets. The protests follow a proposal by Emmanuel Macron's government to increase the age of retirement from 62 to 64. The government says the measure is needed to address a pension funding deficit. The reform is intended to take effect from 2027. The unions leading the protest have already called for renewed protests on January 31st. Moving over to Iraq now, at least 2 people have been killed in a crowd crush ahead of a football match. Over 60 were injured, with some in serious condition. The crush on Thursday local time happened outside Basra International Stadium, ahead of the Arabian Gulf Cup final between Iraq and Oman. Iraq was hosting the tournament for the first time. Officials say the crush began when tens of thousands of fans moved toward the stadium, hoping to be allowed in despite not having tickets. The stadium was still closed at the time of the incident. Despite the crush, the match was allowed to go ahead. Iraq won the game 3-2. Meanwhile, in the US, Hollywood actor Alec Baldwin is set to face 2 charges of involuntary manslaughter. The charges follow the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, who was killed after Baldwin fired a live round from a prop gun on the Rust movie set in New Mexico in 2021. Baldwin has maintained that he was unaware that the gun contained a live round. Film armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed also faces the same charges. A jury will decide not only if they are guilty, but which manslaughter charge applies. If convicted, they could face up to 18 months in jail, but one of the manslaughter charges contains a firearm enhancement, which has a mandatory 5-year prison sentence. And finally, British tennis player Andy Murray won a marathon second-round match at the Australian Open in a comeback win that ended on Friday local time at just after 4 a.m. It's the second longest match ever played at the tournament. At 5 hours and 45 minutes, it was just 6 minutes shy of the record. It's also the second latest match finish in any Grand Slam. Playing at Melbourne's Margaret Court Arena, Murray managed an astounding comeback from 2 sets down against Australian Thanasi Kokkinakis. The result means Murray is through to the 3rd round and will play against Spaniard Roberto Bautista Agut on Saturday. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Hello, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with the latest weather updates. It has gotten much chillier than earlier in the day, and today is also Daehan on the seasonal calendar, meaning big freeze. And it's right on cue as freezing air moves in starting this afternoon, with temperatures going down even lower than this morning. And yellow dust has also swept into the country. Most regions have been enduring high levels of fine dust, with a fine dust advisory issued in many western regions, but air quality should improve along with that chilly winds. Daily highs are 3 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon. Upper regions are staying below freezing all day today under sunny skies nationwide. Then an icy blast will freeze much of the country during the Seollal holiday, with rain and snow in the forecast, with heavy snow expected in Jeollado and Jeju. So be sure to keep updated with the latest forecasts as you make plans with your family, and check your travel schedule in advance. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And those are the headlines at this hour. As always, we have our panel session coming up next, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.